Okay, we are lighting up the darkness. We have such a rich page of the Talmud today. Let's see who's in the house, who's going to be with us, who's going to put in that first comment of where you're tuning in from. Remember, comments of all sorts. Hitting the like and love button, telling us where you're tuning in from, what you're thinking about, thankful for, messages to, questions to me, whatever it is, you put something in the comments and it signals to Facebook that something of value is happening here and more people will have access to the light that we're sharing. Welcome Ivan Bauman from Las Vegas and Lawrence from Queens, New York, Sandy from Michigan. Great to have you with us. This page that we've got today, we're not even going to, we never cover everything because I always do crucial highlights of the daf. But I mean, honestly, there's just so many ideas and teachings and wisdom in this page that really would have qualified for crucial highlights. And we're not going to be able to do them all. But even what we are doing is just going to be rich and who knows, could be life-changing. I mean, it's that good, the stuff that we're covering here in Berachos, the first tractate of the volume. Thank you for all those love buttons. That's great. Welcome, Maria from Texas. Ivan says it's working. I'm going to buy a truck. Oh, yes. And I shared this earlier on the page today. If you didn't catch it, it's still today, right? It's still Tuesday in most places, Tuesday day. So we have a segula, which is a special kind of a teaching. It's from both the mystical and Talmudic traditions. There are certain practices that are protective, right? Almost like a charm, like a protective charm. And today, if you can see it on Accidental Talmudist, just earlier in the page, I shared it, that we have a segula that one who recites the verses from the book of Exodus having to do with the manna in the desert during the week when that is our Torah portion, and this week is Torah portion Beshalach, right? So this includes also the children of Israel leaving Egypt and crossing the Red Sea, a wall of water on their right and on their left. And then after they crossed the sea, they started grumbling and complaining to Moses. We started grumbling and complaining to Moses. I mean, it just shows human nature, right? Whoever had it better than the people for whom miracles were performed, the plagues, and then the sea was parted, and then they started complaining, well, there's not enough to eat. We should have stayed in Egypt. So they got what to eat. Moses prayed for them, but God was not so happy with the complaining. At any rate, they got the manna. And while we were in the desert for 40 years wandering, every morning we found this manna in the desert. And so the people knew, I mean, like, as simple as opening their eyes and with common sense, that their sustenance all came from heaven. Nowadays, we think, well, whatever we have, we earned it. And that's true. We work hard and we earn our bread, right? By the sweat of our brow, we eat. But nevertheless, we have to have gratitude, just being alive, first of all, being given another day, and then having an opportunity to earn a livelihood. Really, all of it comes from heaven. And so on this day, during the week of the Torah portion, that includes the description of the manna in the desert, and on Tuesday, because Tuesday in the 6 days of creation was the day when the vegetation was created. And the vegetation is all about the sustenance, right? Even a carnivore that eats another animal, the animal that he eats was sustained by plants, right? So ultimately it all comes from the plants. And so on the Tuesday of the week when we read about the manna, if you read the verses of the manna, it's considered a segula for parnasa, right? It's a practice that protects us and will enhance our livelihood, right? So if you feel like you could use an improvement in your livelihood, a little bit more, of what to earn and to have and to be able to, buy the things that you need for yourself and your family. If you want to protect what's already a good, healthy livelihood, then today, read the verses about the manna in the desert. And in the earlier post, just before this post, you'll see that I have a little picture of dew and then a link to those verses and a little prayer that you can say before and after. So that's today, right? Today to do that, to read the chapter of the manna in the week that is part of the Torah portion. Okay, let's get back to our page. We have been learning about prayer generally. We started in our the first book of the Talmud, Blessings. We talked about the Shema for 3 chapters, and then we got into the Amidah, the standing prayer. Now we're in chapter 5, and we're talking more about the content of the Amidah and sort of philosophically, spiritually, what do certain things mean. And we're going to learn about that now from the example of Moses, because Moses stood before the Lord and prayed for the Jewish people at a time when we really needed it, right? When we committed the sin of the golden calf. I mean, you talk about, forgetting quickly how good we had it. How is it possible that a people who, were liberated through miracles of the plagues and then had the sea parted for them and then were being fed manna in the desert, and then Moses disappeared for 40 days to receive the Torah on top of Mount Sinai, and the people at the base of the mountain, after a while, despaired that he might never come back and created that golden calf, right? And it was a form of idolatry, and it angered the Lord. He was not happy with the people. And he said, you know what, Moses, I'm going to destroy this people. I'm going to wipe them out and start over. And I'll start over with you, right? And so it's like he's going to make a new Jewish people from Moses' family, almost like the way God started over with Noah. Now he wasn't going to start over for the whole world, the whole human population, but the Jewish population, he was going to start over with Moses and Moses' family. And Moses said, no, please, God, don't do that. And then he gave a whole series of arguments why God shouldn't do that. And Moses was successful, right? So he argued with God, but he was really praying to God, beseeching the Lord. I beseech the Lord. That's what Moses says. I beseech the Lord. So let's just get into that. First of all, so one of the arguments that Moses made, this is according to our sages, is that essentially God put a stumbling block before the blind, right? Meaning that God himself created a situation in which it was too big a temptation for the people to make this idol. Now, they weren't worshiping the golden calf, right? The idea wasn't that the golden calf would now be their God. It was more that the golden calf would replace Moses, who they thought had died, right? He'd gone up there on the mountain. He hadn't eaten for 40 days, and there was, fire on the mountain. And they thought, well, I mean, he just got too close to the source of divinity, and he perished. And now we're all out here in the desert alone, and we can't talk directly to God. Look what just happened to Moses. This was in their imagination. So we need some kind of intercessor between us and God, and that's what they made the golden calf for. But it was a mistake. They shouldn't have done it. But it was an understandable mistake, is what Moses argued to God. And our sages say that it was sort of like a father who dresses up his son in really nice clothes and, gives him scent on his skin and puts a bag of gold around his neck and then deposits him at the door of a brothel, right, of a house of prostitution, and then says, good luck, meaning don't sin, right? Don't commit a sin. Don't go with a prostitute. But he just deposited him at the house of prostitution with money around his neck. What do our sages mean by that? It means that the people of the children of Israel, when they left Egypt, right, the Egyptians realized that they were guilty of enslaving this people for over 200 years, and so gave them a lot of silver and gold to take with them, which fulfilled the promise that God had made to Abraham, that your descendants will be slaves for a long time, but when they leave Egypt, they will not leave empty-handed, right? They will actually leave with a fortune. And so they now receive that fortune, but now they're in this situation where they're in the desert. They've got tons of gold, silver and gold. They're afraid they're going to die because Moses is missing. So they think, well, maybe the reason we have all this silver and gold is so that we could, make this thing that will save our lives. That's the way they were thinking. They were wrong. But our sages said that one of the arguments that Moses made was, God, look, you set this up. How surprised can you be that they behave this way? Let me just unplug that. Oh boy. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So that was just one of the arguments, okay? But Moses, but it was more than that, right? He really prayed hard for the people. And what's interesting is that when the people first sinned like that, when Moses became aware that they sinned, he thought, well, I represent the people. I'm here to receive the Torah on their behalf. So now that they've diminished themselves so much, right, by becoming idolaters, by creating this golden calf, then I, as their representative, I'm a loser, right? That's how he felt to himself. Whatever standing I had to represent this people in speaking with God, the people have become so diminished that I am diminished as their leader. And I've let them down. I wasn't able to save them from this or give them enough leadership so they wouldn't dip into that. And just as their representative, we have all fallen so low. What can I say? But then God says to Moses, leave me be so that I can go destroy this people, right? And God first says, leave me be. Leave me alone, right? Let me be. Now that's interesting because God doesn't, He doesn't need to tell you to leave me alone. If God doesn't want you communicating with him, God will shut you out. It's pretty easy for God to do. By God saying to Moses, leave me alone, it actually implies that Moses has a choice whether to leave God alone or not. And so Moses got the message that when God said, leave me alone, what he meant was, you can advocate for this people and save them, right? It was the opposite. It's almost like a little kid. I remember our daughter, when she was really little, she was like, Dad, don't tickle me. And what she meant by that was tickle me. And so, God saying to Moses, leave me alone, means that if Moses doesn't leave God alone, then there's a possibility that God will change his mind. And that's when Moses gets in there and really starts making all of these arguments, right? And so he says, well, first of all, you said you're going to start a new, people descending from me because you like me. But no, forget that. My merit is not worthy of such a thing. The merit that matters is the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These people are all descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In the merit of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you should save this people, not my merit, to replace them. And if that's not good enough, Moses prayed with so much fervor that it says two things. One is that he became sick with the prayer. So this is not an argument. This is just showing how much he wanted this. And later in this page, we will learn that since the temple was destroyed, the gate of prayer is locked. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean it's closed. It means it's locked, right? That prayers don't have the same kind of power now that they did prior to the destruction of the temple. So this is obviously all long before the destruction of the temple. But even after the destruction of the temple, when the gates of prayer became locked, the gate of tears remained open, and it is open to this day, right? So one who cries before the Lord, one who gets all his emotion into prayer at such a degree that he becomes physically ill, but like heartache, right? That's what we're talking about here. If you're praying for something with so much devotion and intensity and emotion that you feel heartache, right? That's a prayer that will be heard. And Moses got to that place. This wasn't just intellectual, argumentation. Moses prayed with that kind of emotion on behalf of the people. In addition, Moses offered his own life so that God would save the people. He said, erase me from your book, meaning kill me. If that will do it, then save this people. In addition, Moses sort of named God's attribute of mercy, right? And said, look, you have an attribute of justice and an attribute of mercy. We see this prayer in many other places in the Talmud. May your attribute of mercy overpower your attribute of justice. You'd be right to punish this people. They have sinned, they have transgressed, but let your mercy be greater than your justice. In addition, Moses says it would be a sacrilege to destroy this people. How could God commit a sacrilege? It makes no sense. God defines what holy is. Whatever God does essentially is holy. But Moses is saying that you elevated this people, right? When you released them from bondage in Egypt and performed miracles for them and parted the sea for them, so you essentially said to the whole world, hey, this is a people that is dear to me. And because they're dear to you, God, now they're a holy people, like a nation of priests is another thing that God would say a little later. So this holy people, right, who have attained some level of holiness because you place them in that position, if you now destroy them, so you'd be destroying something holy. That would be a sacrilege. Please don't do it, God, says Moses. And in addition, he says, you promised the patriarchs, you swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that their descendants would become a people. They would come out of bondage in Egypt, and they would eventually become as numerous as the stars in the sky or the grains of sand, in the world, and you would give them the promised land, and you didn't swear by heaven and earth, which are temporary, says Moses. That's beautiful. You didn't swear by heaven and earth. I mean, at some point, maybe billions of years, but at some point, those things are just going to go away. But rather, God, you swore by your eternal name. That's eternal. Heaven and earth, they will come and go. Might be a geological time scale of billions of years, but eventually they will go. But your eternal name is forever. And you swore by your eternal name that you would fulfill these promises on behalf of their descendants. So now I'm holding you to that vow, says Moses to God, right? Otherwise you'd be breaking your vow, and you don't want to do that. Regarding the sort of small vow or the small promise you made in your anger to destroy this people because they behave so badly. So there Moses says, I will nullify your vow. Right? When a person makes a vow is a vow. But vows can be nullified under certain conditions by a sage who would question the person who makes the vow and say, well, if you knew certain things at the time that you made the vow, would you have made that vow? And the person says no. And then the sage says, okay, so I can nullify your vow for you because you didn't make it fully informed. Now, God is obviously fully informed. He's completely, God knows everything. So there's no condition. How can his vow be nullified based on not knowing something? And yet, God gives us free will. He may know the outcome, but he allows a situation where, we don't know what we're going to do. And essentially God sort of suspends, he suspends his omniscience of the future. It's not that he doesn't know. God does know, but it's as if it's withheld, right? And so God enters into relationship with us. And even though he can predict what we're going to do because he knows everything, still he treats us as if the future is unwritten, right? And in that sense, an opening is created where Moses can nullify God's vow. You see how the sages are just being very imaginative and creative and fleshing out, this moment of prayer and of argumentation between Moses and God. A little bit similar to Abraham arguing on behalf of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah that, if there's some righteous people there, you shouldn't destroy the city. Will the creator of justice, will the judge of the world not do justice? Said Abraham to God on behalf of the people of Sodom, whom he was not really involved with. Here, Moses is arguing with God on behalf of his people, right? His family, his tribe, his people that he has now shepherded out of Egypt and across the sea and into the wilderness. And so what keeps coming out of this conversation is the emotion, right? And this is all being taught to us as an example of how we should pray, right? What you're hearing from me is anything but rote, repetitive, formulaic prayer. This is using all of your faculties and all of your reason and standing before God and being very, very humble and understanding just how powerful God is. I mean, we can't really understand that, but to the limits of our understanding how powerful God is. And that's what we're learning from Moses. Furthermore, Moses says, I told the people that you promised our patriarchs. So they know that you promised by your eternal name to our ancestors that you would, bring this people out of Egypt and eventually give them the promised land. Not that you get so angry at us that you would destroy us in the desert. And eventually, these arguments prevail over God. And God says, see, I have forgiven according to your word. It's very beautiful, this whole dialogue that goes on. We also have on this page the idea that prolonged prayer is good, right? And in fact, we learn that the early generations, the pious people of the early generations, their prayer was so intense and focused and deep that they would actually need an hour to prepare to pray, just to get into the mindset of prayer. And then they would get to these incredible heights, maybe mystical heights. And then they would get so, high out of this world and connecting with God that when their prayer was over, it would take them an hour to come down, right? That is not for us. We just, so you figure that this morning, afternoon, and evening prayer, those could take about an hour, the way that they used to do it, plus the hour before and the hour after at each session. So it's like they were spending 9 hours a day, either in prayer, preparing for prayer, coming out of prayer. That's not for us, right? So the halakha for us is you just need a moment of preparation, almost like it takes as much time as to walk past 2 doorways. That's the way it's put, to walk past 2 doorways. And that metaphor is on purpose, right? We have to think when we're entering prayer, I gotta as we discussed yesterday, you can't just come from a conversation or from frivolous matters or from judging a case or from working on something that's difficult and confusing. Those are things of real life. So when it's time to pray, we gotta, just make a little adjustment, a little preparation, get into the right frame of mind. And then what we can understand from what we've been learning these last few days is, okay, I'm getting ready to pray. I want to have a mindset of both awe and joy, right? So awe, from what we've been reading today, sort of makes sense. Like, okay, I'm coming before the judge of the world. I can't rely on my deeds. I've done many things wrong in my life. I've fallen short so many times. I haven't completed my mission, and there have been so many days when I just failed to fulfill even any portion of my mission. So, that's fear and trembling when you come before God. But the joy is knowing that, and He wants us. He wants us to pray, right? He wants us to step forward. He wants relationship with us. So, we can't rely on our own deeds, but we can't expect that we're coming before our Father who loves us, right? He really loves us. If mother is a better image for you, before our mother who loves us. God is neither male nor female, right? But he's a parent who loves us like a parent. And that can be the joy component when we approach. And we just have to take a moment, but the amount of time it takes to pass 2 doorways, right? It's like 2 doorways to get ready for prayer. And then once we're in, okay, so, we don't always have time to prolong prayer. And as we read yesterday, if we're the prayer leader, then we must not prolong prayer and impose that on others. But if we can find the time, and if we can sink into the emotion, and if we can get to a state where it's not only not a burden to pray, but we're just involved in it, we're not even aware of the passage of time, then that's good, and that will help our prayers to be heard. We may not always get there, we may only get there rarely, but it is something to aspire to attain that kind of prayer and that kind of emotion in our prayer. What we must never do is expect our prayers to be answered. Right? We can't ever come before the Holy One with arrogance, like, well, I'm a really good guy, and I've done a lot of good stuff, and look what I did today. I helped so-and-so and so-and-so, and I did this, and I gave that much to charity, or, whatever the deeds are, we might be really proud of it. Doesn't mean that we should ever expect to have our prayers answered. We must only approach the Holy One with humility. The Holy One does not like arrogance of any sort. And lastly, we have a teaching here that 4 things require constant improvement. 4 things. And those are Torah study, right? Our ability to learn these teachings will never, no matter how big a master you are, it's never mastered. Good deeds, right? No matter how much good we've done, we could do more. But there was a nice illustration of that idea at the end of Steven Spielberg's movie Schindler's List. Remember? So Schindler saved, I think, 1,100 Jews who would certainly have ended up in the gas chamber at Auschwitz, but for him interceding. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing that he did by having that list and protecting, the people who came to be known as the Schindler Jews. But at the end of the movie, when the war was over and those people were now protecting him, since he was working with the Nazis, he would be a war criminal if they didn't testify on his behalf. But what he was thinking about was, I could have saved more. I could have saved more. I could have saved more. And of course they said, don't torture yourself. You did so good. You did great. But we could always do more. Prayer is the third thing that is always capable of being improved, right? One cannot master prayer, not possible. So there's always room for improvement. And finally, occupation, right? At our job. Whatever we do, we could be better at it. We could do it better. We could perform it better. We could accomplish more with it. We could align our occupations better with our mission on earth. If it's a job that's really just a job to make money, okay, so we could make more money. Why is that a holy thing? Because if we're carefully tithing, if we're setting aside 10% of the money we make to give to good causes and to help the widow and the orphan, etc., so then the more money we make, the better. Right? Obviously, so long as it's honest. We have to be honest. But whatever we do, we could do it better and accomplish more and help more people with it and create something more holy and more beautiful and closer to what we were put on earth to do. Okay, tomorrow we're going to continue on page 33 of Berachos, and then we're going to return to a subject that was at the beginning of this, or near the beginning of the volume, when we were talking about when we're praying the Shema, or we're reciting the Shema, accepting the yoke of heaven, what happens when we're interrupted and somebody walks by and says hello. Now we're going to look at what happens if we're interrupted when we're praying the Amidah, right? In the Shema, we were accepting the yoke of heaven and declaring, there's only one God, and and he has commanded us to do such and such. When we're praying, we're talking to that God. We're in a direct relationship. So the rules of interruption are a little bit different for praying as for reciting Shema. And we'll get into that tomorrow. For today, I would say the takeaway is to learn from Moses that, Moses was not some remote ruler from somewhere in history who was, different than everybody else, and, so different than us that we can't have a personal connection and take a personal lesson from him. Rather, Moses was a man who, first of all, did not think he was worthy to have that job, was very reluctant to do it, thought that nobody would listen to him, considered himself a person who is not a good speaker at all, in fact, was so afraid of public speaking that he insisted that he was not good at it. And finally, God said, all right, fine, I'll send your brother Aaron with you, and he'll do the talking. By the end of his life, Moses will have grown so much in his role as a leader that he's not only unafraid to speak publicly. The book of Deuteronomy is a month-long sermon that he gives to the people. He's grown, right? He's become better at fulfilling his mission. And in fulfilling that mission, it wasn't just a job for him. It was very, very emotional, right? And if we are only, sort of approaching religion and the divine and philosophy at an intellectual level, so we have work to do. We have to get to the place where it may not be every day, but from time to time, our prayer is emotional. Okay, let me look at some of these comments and let me know if there's a question about what we've covered today. Shalom out of the snow in St. Moritz, says Joyce Nowak. That's Switzerland? That's so cool. Donna Smith says, an understanding God. I'm just scrolling back, so I'm not sure what you mean by that comment, Donna. Let me know, maybe a little clarification. Marcus says, you're so kind, wise, and inspiring. How is it you're not a rabbi? Well, I never studied to become a rabbi. And while I've been studying for a long time, my shortcoming is Hebrew. I mean, at this point, I've picked up a lot more Hebrew than I knew when I started. But, a rabbi has to be really fluent with the language, and I'm nowhere near that. I'm working on it. I have my friend, Rabbi Aaron Parry, and if you're listening, we got to get started again on our Hebrew lessons. But there's other reasons too. I'm not a rabbi. I am not a rabbi, but my thirst for Torah and for knowledge and for relationship with the divine has always been great, and it's helping me, overcome those many, many years of when I was disconnected and, just knowing nothing, right? So now it's been some time that I've been on this journey, and I try to keep growing, but, late start for me. So much to know and so much to learn. But I do enjoy teaching, and I'm so glad that we have this community. And, if I'm able, I think maybe what's useful about what I do is that I am a communicator, and Nina and I are screenwriters, and I'm a director. And so I try to create a picture for people, using the skills I've learned from the entertainment industry and from storytelling to get some of these ideas across. And, if we've ever been in a Torah class together, for many years I attended one that Adam Klickfeld was teaching. And sort of my role in the class, as we were just going very carefully into the verses of the Torah, my role tended to be, well, let's imagine what this was really like. Where were they standing? What were they doing? If I was directing the scene for a movie, then what would we learn from really imagining the scene rather than just, what do we get from the words on the page? And that's what I try to do. And Dodge Schwantz says, glad to know we're required to improve, but the work is never finished. For sure. And that's a teaching from Pirkei Avos, right? The work is never done, but the fact that it's never done does not excuse us from getting up and trying and doing our part. And Iris Bitten says, Rabbi Akiva started late. Yeah, really late. I started maybe a little earlier than Akiva. But then, he went to the academy and was learning Torah 20 hours a day. So I do my best, but I haven't committed the way that Akiva did. And Akiva ultimately, he lived and taught and learned in a time so different than our own. Maybe we should finish with this. Akiva taught, during a Roman persecution. And ultimately, he was told, do not teach Torah, it will cost you your life. And he kept teaching anyway, and it cost him his life. He was martyred, and not just, not just like a quick execution, like, the way people are executed in prisons today, a Roman execution where they flayed him, they just peeled the skin off his body in the most painful way and then burned him. It's terrible, terrible. And we live in a time where, just here in LA, there's probably 100 kosher restaurants. And any supermarket, we can pick up kosher food. We could turn on our smartphone and have, hundreds of different Torah classes to choose from. It's never been so easy to be a connected person, to practice our religion, to be involved. And the vast majority of people don't bother, right? They don't bother. They say, yeah, religion, that's old superstitious mumbo jumbo. I'm a modern person. I don't need that. When people take that attitude, it's tragic because it's like they cut themselves off from the source of energy, the source of their soul, right? They're cutting themselves off from the source of the blessing that animates their soul. And it's almost like, it's almost like if somebody was trying to craft a way, to kill us spiritually, they couldn't do much better than sticking us in a society that is so obsessed, with surfaces and just good looks and superficiality and quick pleasure, etc. So we have to realize that we've never had so much freedom as we have now, but the challenges are still very great, right? To see real light, spiritual light in this world takes work. We have to really open our eyes and keep opening them and keep on that path. Thank you, my dear friends, for learning with me today. And with God's help, we'll continue tomorrow. We'll be on Daf 33 of Berachos tomorrow. And I think it's likely that I'm going to be going in the morning, but this just can't. We don't have a regular time for this show. It's not going to be regular. It's a bit of a guess. When is Sal? When is Sal? It's like not where's Waldo, but when is Sal? So probably 10 o'clock Pacific tomorrow is a pretty good guess, but we'll see. There's just so much going on around here. All the best, my dear friends. Sending you big love from the West Coast.